Funding for this program was made possible by Humanities Kansas. People can change the world.
My name is Era Martina. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and raised in Kansas City, Missouri. I was raised in a home with both parents, and there were 3 girls. My maternal grandparents, Martina and Benito Mendoza, those are my grandparents on my mom's side. And Era comes from my father's side, my fraternal side, and Martina was my mother's name. My mom was a stay-home mom. She was a homemaker, and in my early years, pre-K, I was at home with Mom. Dad was the breadwinner. He wanted my mom to stay home. He was the one that was out working hard. I worked for the city of Kansas City, by the way. And and I was born on his birthday. So I think that had a little bit to do with it as well. But we would always do things, the 3 of us, because my sisters were older and had gone on and started life a little, on their way to starting life. College. My oldest sister, she got married and I was 5 when I was 5 years old. So they had started life. So it was Mom, Mama, Daddy, and myself. And I remember as a child on Sundays, that was the day, because we lived in Missouri. So on Sundays, we would go over to Kansas, and that would be our day with my mom's side of the family. And we would go over to an aunt's house. My mother was the oldest of 16 children, of which 4 had died at birth. But so there were a lot of siblings that she had. So her sisters were married and had families, and we would go on Sundays, and that was the treat that I remember, as being able to go and share and play with my cousins that I may not have been as close as I would to some of my dad's family. But it was an opportunity for us to go, and I always look forward to Sunday, because that was the day that I could go and play and share with them. My dad's parents, I did not know them. I only knew my mom's parents. My grandfather passed away many years before I was born. My grandmother, Grandma Era, she died the year before I was born. So I just always heard of fond stories, fond memories that my sisters had of Grandma Era. And she was the kind of woman that I wished I had gotten the opportunity to meet. A church woman, a woman that loved the Lord, and that seemed to be just a good woman. And I just didn't have the opportunity to meet them, either one, my grandmother or my grandfather on my father's side.
Era's paternal line continues to exhibit the diverse heritage so deeply entrenched in American society. Her father was Henry T. Carter, son of Era Susan Simpson and Tommy Atkins. Tommy Atkins was born in May of 1885 in Leavenworth County, Kansas, to a Creek Indian named Minnie Atkins and an unknown white man. Minnie was just a teenager when she had given birth to Tommy, and realizing her inability to properly care for young Tommy, she turned to the Carter family for support. At some point while Tommy Atkins was young, the Carters raised him as their own and changed his name to Henry Tommy Carter.
What's significant about Tommy Atkins is that he was the son of an Indian woman, Indian Minnie. He was eventually admitted to the Dawes Rolls, and she enrolled him on the Dawes Rolls. And later on, it was known that this was my grandfather, and he was given away at birth. raised by the Carter family, Henry and Janetta Carter, which his name was Tommy Atkins, but because he was raised with them, they incorporated their name to his name. So he was thus Henry Thomas Carter. And the Carters were known for taking in kids that were not theirs, and kind of like foster parents, or in our day and time would be foster parents. But so I believe that Tommy, my great-grandfather, ended up at their house. That's how he got the name Henry Thomas Carter. And from there, it's, that's where he spent, it was between Leavenworth and McLeod. And growing up, he became an adult, and I knew that there was some oil and some land there was land that he was given as a result of him being enrolled on the Dawes Rolls, and it ended up being one of the wealthiest pieces of land in the country. And this was my grandfather. As I became an adult, then it became a mission for me. I knew then I had to get to the bottom of this. I had to find out what's all involved with Tommy Atkins.
When examining the 1885 Kansas State Census, we find Henry Carter, age 75, and his wife Jane E., also known as Jeanette, age 58, with 2 adult children. There is no mention of a baby named Henry Tommy Atkins or Carter. By 1895, 86-year-old Henry Carter is listed with 2 adult children and a 12-year-old boy listed as H. Carter. Could this be Tommy Atkins?
The first time I remember hearing something about Tommy Atkins was probably about 6 or 7. And it's when we would take vacations, what I thought was a vacation, going to Muskogee, Oklahoma. But in fact, my dad, my aunts, and my mom, they were all going down to meet with attorneys, find as much information as they could about their dad, Henry Thomas Carter, aka Tommy Atkins. And that was when I first heard about it as a young girl. And growing up, I continued to hear stories from my sisters. Even as an adult, I've met cousins that I had never met before. They even brought up stories.
By 1895, Minnie had enrolled her son in the Creek Nation with his blood quantum listed as half. This enabled Tommy to all rights and privileges to the Creek Nation. Interestingly, something happened in May of 1917. Tommy's name was stricken from the Dawes Rolls. The question was and is, why?
I uncovered records, some copies of which have been kept in my family. So they've been passed down to me. Once I said, I want to take this, I want to go find, dig, do whatever I need to do, then they gave me copies of what my sister had. And it includes court records. Some I had to go find and research on my own. And I found out that she was sent to Leavenworth, Kansas. And she worked with a couple different families. But long story short, she got pregnant and ended up abandoning the child, for which I believe was my grandfather. And the story I was told is that she left him, and that's how he became to live at the Carter house. This is my grandfather, and I want to get to the bottom of this story. I want to know the truth about everything that involves him, and I want to be able to pass this on to my children.
Up until 1914, Oklahoma was referred to as Indian Territory. The land allotted to Tommy Atkins, also known as Henry T. Carter, was south of Tulsa. In court records, it's referred to as the Cushing Oil Pool. At its peak, 8,000 barrels of oil was produced daily at 81 cents per barrel, which was annually valued at well over $2.3 million in 1914. minus equipment and startup fees. By today's standards, that's just well over $57 million.
There was an oil company that was digging on a piece of property in Oklahoma. When they struck oil, they were ordered to stop so they could find the owners. It was under the name of my grandfather. They had a hard time finding him. They scoured the country to find him. And eventually they went, Charles Page, who was a very well-known man from Oklahoma, oil man, oil tycoon in the railroad business as well. And he used to be a private investigator. So he said he was going to go and set out to find Tommy Atkins' mom, Indian Minnie, and found her working at an army post in Washington, the state of Washington. And she did not really want to get involved in recalling any of this. But from my knowledge, he told her, if you go ahead and come back, let's work on this together. And if you sign everything over to me, then I will make sure that you're good for the rest of your life.
July of 1914 initiated a lower court case that would end with a final ruling with the U.S. Supreme Court in 1922. Minnie Atkins initially provided testimony that she gave birth to 5 children: Tommy Atkins, Robert Peterkin, Alice Peterkin, Charles Harrison, and Harvey Harrison.
The court records that I have state that she said that Tommy Atkins died at an early age. The court said, okay, we want you to take us to the tomb, to the grave where he's buried. They went out, they took the jury, I guess, and went to the land but could not find the grave. Fast forward, I have a copy of her will, which includes the husband that she married, the guy that she married, and the 2 sons, but it also includes Tommy Atkins as a son. And I just find it strange that if he had died like she said he did, which I don't believe he did because that would be my grandfather, why would he be included on her will?
Did Tommy Atkins die prior to 1901? Was Minnie the mother of Thomas Atkins? Was Henry T. Carter truly Tommy Atkins? Correspondence from 1915 to 1939 include a host of investigators in search of Minnie Atkins and her son Tommy, the sole heir to the land allotted to him by Creek tribal law. Minnie provided inconsistent statements regarding her son Tommy, first claiming that she gave birth to him in Leavenworth in 1885, and when he was young, she gave him up to be raised by the Carter family. In another statement, she claimed that her son Tommy Atkins died prior to 1901. The statement of Tommy Atkins, also known as Henry T. Carter, aligned with his mother's initial testimony. After 1900, Tommy Atkins is identified on primary documents as Henry Carter. In 1922, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of Minnie Atkins. From the majority opinion, it reads,
"The questions of fact relating to the conflicting claims advanced by Minnie Atkins, Nancy Atkins, and Henry Carter have been determined in favor of Minnie by both courts below upon survey of all the evidence, and we find nothing which would justify us in overruling their well-considered action."
Additionally, the court ruled that her son Tommy Atkins was enrolled in the Creek Nation, however held to her testimony that he died prior to 1901. Charles Page, founder of Sand Springs, Oklahoma, had a vested interest in the case of Minnie Atkins. He spent time and resources trying to locate Minnie and her son Tommy. The question is why? Could it have been the oil produced on Tommy's land? Did he orchestrate certain events that would be in his favor? Did he persuade Minnie to deny Tommy was her son or that he died prior to 1901? It's pure conjecture to try and answer these questions, given that these events happened over 100 years ago. However, The answer could lie in the DNA of a living offspring of Tommy Atkins, aka Henry T. Carter. The featured guest in parts 1 and 2 of An American Story agreed to take an ancestry DNA test to explore aspects of their recent and distant DNA. Era also agreed to take this test. As we have learned, Era's genetic makeup truly reflects all that is American, descending from African slaves, Caucasian, Mexican, and Native American roots. The question is, what would her genetic composition reveal? Era's results show that she is 46% European, 27% Native American, 24% African, and 4% Middle Eastern. I noticed that Era has similar results to Alex, featured in part 2 of An American Story. Alex is of Mexican descent on her maternal and paternal lines, yet Era, who is half Mexican, has just as much Native American ancestry as Alex. Could this be that she is the great-granddaughter of Minnie Atkins? Is the oral history of Tommy Atkins, also known as Henry T. Carter, true? What we do know is that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of Minnie Atkins and that she legitimately enrolled her son Tommy Atkins in the Creek Nation. The life of Tommy Atkins, or Henry T. Carter, is still shrouded in mystery. The court records convey a truth. The oral history conveys truth. The DNA conveys truth. Following the birth of his daughter Louise in 1915, Tommy Atkins, also known as Henry T. Carter, left his wife and children and moved to Oklahoma. He remarried to a woman named Harriet, and on September 28, 1950, Tommy Atkins took his last breath. He is buried in the Fish Cemetery in Holdenville, Oklahoma. His legacy continues to this day, regarding the involvement in one of the most noted land disputes in Creek history. I'm Lyle Gibson, and thank you for joining us in our presentation of An American Story.